Hello and welcome to Insomniac Dose. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. I took the job at the Coyote Diner on a Tuesday in late March, which tells you everything you need to know about how desperate I was. The ad on Craigslist had been sparse, almost suspiciously so. Live-in cook position, Nevada desert, cash weekly, room provided, immediate start. No benefits listed, no corporate email, just a phone number that rang exactly once before someone picked up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Marcy. She asked 3 questions. Could I cook? Did I have warrants? Could I start tomorrow? I answered yes, no, and yes. 29 years old, laid off from a prefab chain kitchen in Reno, my car held together with duct tape and prayer, and my bank account hovering somewhere between empty and overdrawn. I didn't have the luxury of being picky. When Marcy said the job came with a room behind the kitchen and meals included, I was already packing. The drive out took 4 hours on highways that got progressively smaller, more cracked, more forgotten. The last 30 miles were 2-lane blacktop through nothing, just scrub brush, distant mountains that looked like torn cardboard against the sky, and heat shimmer that made the horizon waver like a mirage. No other cars, no buildings, the kind of landscape that makes you understand why people see things that aren't there. The Coyote Diner appeared suddenly, squatting beside the road like it had been waiting specifically for me. Single-story, flat-roofed, painted a sun-faded turquoise that might have been cheerful 40 years ago. The neon sign, a coyote mid-howl above the words, "Open 24 hours," buzzed audibly even from the parking lot, flickering in a pattern that seemed almost rhythmic. 6 vehicles sat in the gravel lot, 2 big rigs, 3 sedans that looked older than me, and a pickup truck with Nevada plates so faded the numbers were illegible. I parked beside the pickup and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, taking in the full picture. Behind the diner, maybe 30 yards back, sat an empty lot with a rusted swing set listing to one side and what looked like an old well, the kind you see in photographs from the Depression. Circular stone base with a wooden cap warped by decades of desert sun. Beyond that, nothing. Just more desert, more scrub, more emptiness that seemed to swallow sound. No cell service. My phone displayed a single bar that vanished when I looked at it directly, like something shy. Inside, the diner was exactly what you'd expect and somehow worse for it. 6 vinyl booths along the windows, their red upholstery cracked and patched with electrical tape. A long Formica counter with 8 swiveling stools, 3 of which were occupied by men who didn't look up when I entered. A jukebox in the corner, silent and dark. The smell of old grease, burnt coffee, and something underneath, something mineral and dry like dust that had been baked into the walls. Behind the counter stood Marcy Harlan, and I knew it was her immediately. 50-something gray hair pulled back severely. Lines around her mouth that spoke of cigarettes and squinting into sun. She had the sharp, assessing eyes of someone who had seen everything at least twice and wasn't impressed either time. "Ethan Cole?" she asked, her voice roughened by smoke or screaming or both. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel older than I already am." She gestured toward a door beside the kitchen pass-through. "Your room's through there. Drop your stuff, then we'll talk." The room was small, smaller than my first apartment, bigger than my car. A single bed, a dresser with a mirror that had a crack running diagonally across it, a window that looked out at the well and the empty desert beyond. Clean enough, functional, depressing in the way that temporary housing always is because you know you're supposed to be grateful just to have it. I dropped my duffel on the bed and returned to the front. Marcy had poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one. She slid one across the counter to me and nodded toward the end booth away from the other customers. We sat. She didn't waste time. Overnight shift, 6 nights a week, Sunday off, 300 cash weekly plus room and meals. You cook what's on the menu, you keep the kitchen clean, you don't ask questions about the customers. She paused, watching my face. You got a problem with any of that? No, I said, though the last part felt strange. What kind of questions would I ask? Marcy's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You'll find out. She reached into her apron and pulled out a stained manila envelope, sliding it across the table. This is more important than your pay schedule or your health insurance, which you don't have, by the way. Read it twice. Memorize it. Follow it exactly. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the kind that had been photocopied so many times the text was slightly fuzzy. At the top, in bold capitals, kitchen and night service rules. Read twice. Memorize. I scanned the list. Some of it seemed standard. Sanitize surfaces, check propane connections, lock the back door at closing, but then, Rule 6. At 2:13 a.m. exactly, turn off all kitchen lights for 1 minute. Do not turn them on early. Rule 9. If the jukebox plays by itself, do not look at the song title, continue working. Rule 11. If a customer asks for special water, pretend you did not hear them. If they ask a second time, offer only tap water in a paper cup. Rule 15. Never serve anything off menu, regardless of how much they offer to pay. I looked up at Marcy, trying to read whether this was hazing, superstition, or some elaborate small-town joke. Her expression was flat, patient, waiting. This is serious? I asked. More serious than anything else, I'll tell you. She leaned forward slightly, and I caught the smell of tobacco and something sharper, fear maybe, or exhaustion. This isn't about health inspections or customer service. This is about staying alive long enough to collect your first paycheck. I laughed, a short, nervous sound. Come on, what's really... Ethan. She didn't raise her voice, but the way she said my name made me stop. I've been running this place for 17 years. Before me, my father ran it for 23. We've had 14 cooks in that time. The ones who followed the rules are still alive. The ones who thought they knew better. She didn't finish the sentence, just let it hang there like smoke. I looked down at the list again. 23 rules in total, single-spaced, numbered precisely. Some made no sense. Some made too much sense in a way I didn't want to examine. Rule 18. If you see a child outside the windows after midnight, do not open the door. Offer water through the mail slot only if they ask specifically for regular water. Rule 21. If someone sits in booth 3 and never looks up, do not approach them until they speak first. After they leave, wipe the table only with salt. Do not touch anything they left behind. What happens if I don't follow them? I asked quietly. Marcy stood, picking up both coffee cups. Then you'll find out why we go through so many cooks. She walked back toward the counter, then paused and looked back at me. First shift starts at 10 tonight. I'll show you the kitchen layout at 9. Until then, get some rest. You'll need it. I sat alone in the booth, the rules list in my hands, reading them a second time as instructed. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, turning the desert gold and then orange and then the color of dried blood. The neon coyote flickered and buzzed, and somewhere in the empty lot behind the diner, something metal creaked in the wind. I told myself it was just wind. I told myself the rules were just small-town paranoia, the kind of folklore that grows in isolated places where there's nothing to do but scare each other. I told myself I'd use common sense, do the job, save money, and leave as soon as I could afford to fix my car. I told myself a lot of things that first day. None of them turned out to be true. The overnight shift had a rhythm to it that I picked up quickly. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., with most of the traffic concentrated in two windows. The first hour after I started, when truckers stopped for coffee and cigarettes before the long haul to Reno or Vegas, and then again around 3 or 4 in the morning, when the drunks from whatever town lay beyond the darkness came looking for eggs and hash browns to soak up their regret. In between those windows, between midnight and 3, the diner became something else. Quieter. Emptier. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but expectant, like the building itself was holding its breath. Marcy worked the first 3 nights with me, showing me where everything was kept, how the ancient flat top preferred to be treated, which burner on the 6-burner stove would heat unevenly and burn anything you weren't watching. She moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had performed these exact motions thousands of times, while muscle memory worn into grooves deeper than thought. She didn't mention the rules again, didn't need to. I'd memorized them mostly because I couldn't stop reading them, turning that stained piece of paper over in my hands during breaks, trying to find logic in the strange ones, dismissing them as superstition even as something in my gut twisted with unease. On the 4th night, Marcy told me I was on my own. "You've got the routine down," she said, untying her apron at 9:30. "Just follow the list, all of it. Don't improvise." "What if something happens that's not on the list?" I asked. She paused at the door, silhouetted against the neon glow from outside. "Then use your best judgment." "But Ethan?" She looked back at me. "Your best judgment should always default to the rules." Then she was gone. And I was alone with the hum of the industrial refrigerator and the buzz of the neon sign and the vast pressing silence of the desert beyond the walls. The first 2 hours went fine. A few truckers came through, ordered coffee and pie, paid in cash, left reasonable tips. One old woman asked for scrambled eggs and toast, ate half, and left the rest arranged in a pattern on her plate, toast torn into small squares forming a circle, eggs mounded in the center. I cleaned the table after she left, trying not to think about why someone would do that, failing. At 11:47, the diner emptied completely. I stood behind the counter, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, listening to the building settle and creak around me. Outside, nothing moved. No cars passed on the highway. No wind disturbed the scrub. Even the neon seemed to buzz more quietly, as if it too was aware of some shift in the air. At 12:23 a.m., the service bell rang. The sound was clear, sharp, unmistakable. The bright ding of the chrome bell that sat on the counter near the kitchen passed through, the one customers used to get attention when no one was visible out front. I was in the kitchen, alone. The pass-through gave me a clear view of the entire counter. No one was there. I stood very still, spatula in hand, telling myself I'd imagined it. That the bell had somehow rung itself, vibration from a truck on the highway, settling foundation, something rational. The bell rang again, twice this time. Ding ding, insistent, patient. I set down the spatula and walked slowly to the pass-through, looking out at the empty diner. Every booth visible, every stool vacant. The front door closed, the neon open sign casting red and blue shadows across the cracked vinyl. Except booth 3 wasn't empty. A man sat there, back to me, shoulders hunched forward, head bowed low as though he was praying or sleeping or both. He wore a dusty denim jacket, the kind ranch workers used to wear before everything became synthetic. Dark hair, graying at the temples. Completely still. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps. He was just there like he'd always been there, like I'd somehow failed to notice him despite looking at that exact booth 30 seconds earlier. I pushed through the kitchen door, forcing my expression into something approximating professional hospitality. "Sorry, didn't hear you come in. What can I—" "Coffee," the man said without looking up. His voice was quiet even. with an accent I couldn't place. Midwestern maybe, or Canadian, somewhere flat and cold. Black, and don't bring it too hot. The phrasing was strange. Not too hot, but don't bring it too hot, as though the temperature was something I might weaponize. Sure thing, I said, keeping my voice level. I returned to the kitchen, poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting for an hour, lukewarm by any reasonable standard. When I came back out, moving carefully with the cup in hand, the man still hadn't moved, still hadn't looked up. I set the coffee on the table in front of him, noting details automatically. His hands were calloused, nails clean but worn. No watch, no rings. The jacket had a small tear near the collar, neatly mended with thread that didn't quite match. "Anything else?" I asked. He didn't respond, didn't move. The coffee sat steaming faintly, which was wrong because it shouldn't have been steaming at all, not from a pot that old and cool. But I was already backing away, already returning to the kitchen, my heart doing something complicated in my chest. Through the pass-through, I watched him sit motionless for 90 seconds by the kitchen clock. Then, without any visible movement, without lifting his head or reaching for the cup, the coffee was gone. The mug sat empty on the table, a wet ring on the formica, and in the exact center of that ring, a single grain of sand. Deliberate. Placed. I blinked and the man was gone. Booth 3 was empty. The mug remained, along with the water ring and that single grain of sand, but the man had simply ceased to exist between 1 second and the next. I stood in the kitchen doorway, breathing hard through my nose, telling myself to stay calm, to think rationally. I checked the front door, still closed, the small bell above it silent, unmoved. I checked the bathrooms, empty. I even checked the kitchen exit, though I'd been standing in front of it the entire time. No one. Nothing. I returned to the counter and stared at the empty mug. The coffee pot sat on its burner exactly as full as it had been before I poured. I checked twice, measuring with my eyes against the stain line on the glass. Completely full, as though I'd never poured anything at all. That was when I remembered to breathe. I found the rules list in my apron pocket, hands shaking slightly as I unfolded it, scanning down to the ones I'd dismissed as theatrical nonsense. Rule 21. If someone sits in booth 3 and never looks up, do not approach them until they speak first. After they leave, wipe the table only with salt. Do not touch anything they left behind. I'd approached. I'd served him. I'd violated the rule out of pure ignorance, and now I was supposed to wipe the table with salt and not touch what he'd left. The sand grain glinted under the fluorescent lights, impossibly bright. I went to the kitchen, found the large container of salt we used for cooking, brought it back with a clean rag. My hands were steadier now, shock giving way to a kind of cold focus. I poured salt directly onto the table, more than necessary, until it formed a white mound over the water ring. Then I scrubbed circular motions the way you'd wash a wound, working the salt into the formica until the entire surface was frosted with it. The sand grain vanished under the salt. I told myself it had simply been buried, pushed aside, scattered. I told myself I hadn't seen it burrow down into the table surface like something alive. I swept the salt onto the floor, mopped it away, scrubbed the table again with soap and water until it gleamed. Normal, clean, empty. At 2:13 a.m., my phone alarm chirped. I'd set it after reading Rule 6 the first time, more as a joke than anything else. Now it felt like a lifeline. I walked to the kitchen, flipped off all 4 light switches in sequence, and stood in perfect darkness. 1 minute, 60 seconds. I counted them silently, standing in the center of the kitchen, listening to the building breathe around me, the refrigerator's hum, the tick of cooling metal. And underneath, almost inaudible, something that might have been footsteps in the dining area, or might have been my imagination, or might have been something else entirely. At 60 seconds, I flipped the lights back on. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No footprints, no moved objects, nothing. But the coffee pot was empty now, completely empty, and I was absolutely certain I hadn't poured anything since that last cup that never existed. I checked the security camera monitor. Marcy had shown me the system on the first night, 4 cameras covering the dining area and parking lot. I rewound to 12:23, watching the timestamp tick backward. 12:25, 12:24, 12:23. Booth 3 on the monitor, empty. Then a flicker, 3 seconds of pure static. And when it cleared, the booth was empty again. No man, no appearance, no departure, just static where something should have been. I sat in the kitchen for the rest of my shift, cooking when customers appeared, cleaning obsessively between orders, and absolutely refusing to look too long at booth 3. When Marcy arrived at 6 to close out the register, she took one look at my face and nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known. "First one?" she asked. "The man in booth 3, I said quietly. "He never looked up. They never do." She counted bills methodically, not looking at me. "Did you follow the rule?" I didn't know it applied until after, but I used salt. Like it said. "Good." She snapped a rubber band around the cash, made a note in a ledger. "That's the only reason you're still here to tell me about it." The last cook approached before the customer spoke, touched his shoulder to get his attention. She paused, pen hovering. "We found his apron in the parking lot. Nothing else. Just the apron laid out flat like someone had been wearing it and simply evaporated." I thought about the sand grain, about the impossible coffee, about 3 seconds of static that erased a person from recorded reality. "What are they?" I asked. Marcy closed the ledger. "Wrong question. The right question is, what do they want?" She looked at me then, her sharp eyes softer somehow, almost sympathetic. "And the answer is, they want you to stop following the rules. Because the rules are the only thing keeping you separate from them." She left me with that, disappearing into her office to finish paperwork, and I stood in the empty diner as dawn turned the desert pink and gold, wondering what them meant, wondering what separate meant, wondering if $300 a week was really worth finding out. The neon coyote howled silently in the growing light. I already knew I wouldn't quit. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was really cooking for. Kayla Monroe arrived on a Thursday with a duffel bag, a bright smile, and absolutely no sense that she'd just walked into something wrong. She was 22, recently dropped out of UNLV, chasing what she called authentic experience before figuring out her real career. The desert, she told me, seemed spiritual. I didn't tell her what kind of spirits she might encounter. Marcy hired her for the waitress position without much ceremony. Apparently, the last girl had quit after 2 weeks, citing family emergency in a text message sent from a number that was disconnected when Marcy tried to call back. We needed someone to work the floor while I cooked. Kayla needed money. The equation was simple. On her first night, I tried to warn her. "There are rules," I said, showing her the laminated sheet Marcy had posted near the kitchen pass-through, a condensed version of the full list, focused on customer service. "They seem weird, but you need to follow them exactly." Kayla skimmed the list, smirking. "Is this like a haunted house thing? Do you guys do this with all the new people?" "It's not a joke." "Okay, but..." She pointed to Rule 9, the one about the jukebox. "If it plays by itself, it's just a mechanical issue, right? Why would I care about the song title?" "Because the rule says not to look." She laughed, the kind of laugh that was friendly, not mocking, but still made it clear she thought I was being charmingly paranoid. "Look, I've worked weird places before. Truck stops, casino diners, an all-night deli in Henderson where the owner kept a shotgun under the register. This is just small-town superstition. I appreciate the atmosphere, but I'm here for tips, not ghost stories. I wanted to tell her about the man in booth 3, about the coffee that existed and didn't exist, about the sand grain that moved like something alive. But saying it out loud would make me sound insane, and I wasn't entirely sure I wasn't. So I said nothing. Kayla worked the floor with practiced efficiency. She was good, quick with refills, friendly without being overfamiliar, the kind of server who could read when a customer wanted conversation and when they wanted silence. The truckers tipped her well, even the stranger customers, the ones who ordered single items and left exact change, seemed to tolerate her presence. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, the woman in white arrived. It was 1:17 a.m., a slow period where I was prepping ingredients for the breakfast rush that would hit around 5. Kayla was wiping down tables, humming along to the silence. The jukebox had been quiet all night, which I'd started to recognize as its own kind of omen. The door opened without the bell ringing. The woman who entered was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. She wore a white dress, not modern, not vintage, just white. The kind of white that seemed to generate its own light, untouched by the dust that coated everything else in a 50-mile radius. Her hair was perfect, dark and glossy, styled in waves that belonged in a 1940s movie. Her shoes were clean, impossibly clean. No one had clean shoes in the desert. She walked to the counter and sat on the center stool, directly in my line of sight through the pass-through. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth were too white, too even, like dental implants or prosthetics or something carved from bone. "Good morning," Kayla said, approaching with the coffee pot. The woman held up one hand, a small gesture, polite but firm. "No coffee, thank you." Her voice was pleasant, musical almost, with an accent I couldn't place. "I'd like to order, please." Kayla pulled out her order pad. "Sure, what can I get you?" The woman's smile widened fractionally. "I want the sunrise." I froze in the kitchen, knife halfway through an onion. "That wasn't on the menu. We served breakfast items, eggs, bacon, pancakes, all the standard greasy spoon options, but nothing called the sunrise." Kayla hesitated. "I'm not sure we have that." "Let me check." "You do," the woman said with absolute certainty. "Your cook knows how to make it." Through the pass-through, I watched Kayla glance back at me, questioning. I shook my head sharply. No, Rule 15 was explicit. Never serve anything off-menu regardless of how much they offer to pay. And below it, Rule 16. If a customer asks for a meal by a name you've never heard, refuse politely. If they insist, offer only toast and salt. I caught Kayla's eye and mouthed, "No." But Kayla had already turned back to the customer, her customer service smile fixed in place. "You know what? I bet we can make something special for you. He's a great cook. I'm sure we can do a nice omelet, maybe with—" "No," I said loudly, stepping to the pass-through. "We can't." Both women looked at me. The customer's smile never wavered, but her eyes, when they met mine, reflected the overhead fluorescence like an animal's eyes catching headlights. Flat, reflective, wrong. "I'm sure you can try," she said softly. "Ma'am, we have a menu," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm happy to make you anything on it, but we don't do custom orders." Kayla shot me a look, confusion mixed with annoyance. A customer willing to pay for special treatment was a better tip. In her world, the customer service logic was obvious. "Ethan, come on," she said quietly. "It's not a big deal. I'll help you make whatever—" The temperature dropped. I don't mean it got cold. I mean the temperature dropped so suddenly and severely that I saw my breath fog in front of my face. Saw Kayla's arms erupt in goosebumps. saw condensation form on the stainless steel prep counter in seconds. The flat top, which had been sizzling with oil, went silent. The oil didn't cool, it simply stopped moving, surface going still as glass, heat vanishing as though someone had cut a wire. The deep fryer did the same. Bubbling oil went dead calm, mid-bubble, frozen in place like someone had paused reality. Outside, the neon sign began to flicker. Not the usual erratic buzz, but a deliberate pattern. 3 short flickers, 3 long, 3 short, SOS in light. "It's fine," Kayla said, but her voice sounded uncertain now. I'll make it. How hard can it be?" She moved toward the kitchen before I could stop her, pushing through the door, tying an apron around her waist with shaking fingers that she probably thought I wouldn't notice. "What do you put in a sunrise?" "Eggs, obviously. Maybe some peppers for color, paprika." "Kayla, stop." She ignored me, pulling eggs from the refrigerator, cracking them into a bowl with hands that were steadier than they should be, like her body was operating on autopilot while her brain processed something else entirely. I grabbed her wrist. "Do not cook that." She looked at me, and for a moment I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. The kind that understands predators. But then she pulled away, shaking her head. "You're being paranoid. It's just food. It's a customer. This is literally what we do." She started whisking eggs, adding milk, reaching for the spice rack. I looked through the pass-through at the woman in white, who sat perfectly still on her stool, hands folded on the counter, watching us with those reflective eyes and that too-wide smile. "Kayla, please, I've got it," she said, pouring the egg mixture onto the still-dead flat top, which somehow began to heat again the moment the eggs touched it, as if her defiance had fed it permission. The eggs cooked, too quickly, too evenly. No brown spots, no uneven heating, just a perfect golden sunrise of an omelet that folded over itself like it had been prepared by a professional chef, even though Kayla's hands were shaking the entire time. She plated it, garnished it with a sprig of parsley from somewhere. We didn't stock parsley. She carried it out to the counter and set it in front of the woman in white. "One sunrise," Kayla said, her voice bright and false. "On the house." The woman looked down at the plate. She picked up her fork. I hadn't seen Kayla bring silverware, but there it was, and cut a single bite. The eggs fell open, steam rising, and I saw something dark in the center. Not paprika, not pepper, something that moved. The woman lifted the bite to her mouth and chewed slowly, deliberately. Then she swallowed and looked up at Kayla. "Wrong," she whispered. Kayla staggered backward as though she'd been slapped. Her hand went to her nose. Blood was running from it, bright and shockingly red against her pale skin. She laughed, a high, confused sound. "I don't..." "What?" More blood. From her nose, from the corner of her mouth. She coughed once, and black sand, fine as powder, black as ink, sprayed from her lips. Too much sand, more than a mouth should hold, more than a stomach should contain. She kept laughing, even as the sand poured out, even as she fell to her knees behind the counter, coughing and choking and laughing like she didn't understand that she was dying. I vaulted over the counter, grabbing her shoulders, trying to tilt her head forward so she wouldn't choke. The sand kept coming, impossible volumes of it, spilling onto the floor in a pile that grew and spread and somehow smelled like sulfur and drought. The woman in white stood. She reached into her purse. When had she been carrying a purse? And pulled out cash, laying it precisely on the counter. 3 $20 bills, creased and old. "Next time, Ethan," she said, looking directly at me, "you'll cook it right." She walked to the door. It opened without her touching it. She stepped out into the desert night, and I watched through the window as she walked into the darkness and simply continued walking. Never getting smaller with distance, never disappearing. Just walking at the same size and clarity until she passed beyond the range of the parking lot lights and vanished. Kayla stopped coughing. The sand stopped pouring. She sat on the floor, breathing hard, her face pale and slick with sweat and blood. The pile of sand beside her was the size of a dinner plate, perfectly circular. "What?" she whispered. "What was that?" I helped her up, guided her to a chair, got her water that she didn't drink. I called Marcy, who arrived 20 minutes later with a first aid kit and a broom. We swept up the sand, all of it. It filled an entire dustpan, heavy and wrong. Marcy dumped it outside beyond the property line, while I stayed with Kayla, who sat silently staring at nothing. She asked for something off menu, I told Marcy. Marcy nodded, unsurprised. They always do. It's a test. A test of what? Whether you'll break the rules to please them. She looked at Kayla, who still hadn't spoken. Whether you're worth taking. Kayla came back to work the next night. She said she felt fine. No lasting effects. No memory of pain, just a weird dream where she couldn't breathe. But she was different, quieter. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and when customers came in, she served them with mechanical efficiency, never making small talk, never asking for modifications. Most notably, she never ate staff meals anymore. I'd see her on breaks, sitting in the back room staring at food like she couldn't remember what it was for. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her looking toward the back lot, toward the capped well, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The woman in white never returned. But the menu board, the old chalkboard above the counter where Marcy listed the daily specials, started showing an item neither of us had written. Sunrise. Ask for Ethan. Written in faint, dusty letters that smudged when touched, leaving black residue on your fingers that smelled like burning hair. I erased it every shift. Every shift it came back. I started looking for answers on my day off, which I spent locked in my room going through everything I could find in the diner that wasn't nailed down. Marcy had given me a key to the storage closet off the kitchen, ostensibly for supplies, but I'd noticed she kept old paperwork there too. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, labeled by year in faded marker. I started with the most recent box, 2008. Inside were inspection reports, supply invoices, receipts for equipment repairs. Normal business records. Boring. I worked backward. 2003, 1997, 1989. In the 1979 box buried under health department notices and a log of maintenance work on the grease trap, I found the newspaper clippings. The first one was from the Esmeralda County Sentinel, dated August 12, 1979. Missing family found in desert. Only shoes recovered. Authorities confirmed yesterday that items belonging to the Pritchard family, missing since August 3rd, have been discovered approximately 15 miles northwest of Highway 95. The family, Robert Pritchard, 34, his wife Diana, 31, and their two children, Sarah, 8, and Michael, 5, were last seen refueling at a service station in Goldfield. Search teams found 4 pairs of shoes arranged in a circle near an abandoned homestead. No other trace of the family has been located. "It's as if they stepped out of their shoes and vanished," stated Sheriff Thomas Morrow. "We've never seen anything like this." I checked the location description against my mental map of the area. 15 miles northwest of Highway 95, near an abandoned homestead. The Coyote Diner was 16 miles northwest of Highway 95. Behind it sat ruins that might once have been a homestead. I'd seen the foundation stones near the well, half buried in sand. There were other clippings, more disappearances spread across decades. 1983, a hitchhiker found wandering, unable to speak, skin blistered despite mild weather. 1991, a truck driver who called 911 claiming the desert is following me, found dead in his cab, no cause of death. His logbook filled with the same sentence repeated hundreds of times. Don't look at the well. 2004, 3 teenagers on a road trip, Abandoned car found idling in the diner parking lot. Personal effects inside. No bodies ever recovered. I photographed the clippings with my phone. Still no service, but the camera worked. Then I kept digging. At the bottom of the 1967 box, I found the logbook. It was leather-bound, warped with age, the kind of ledger businesses used before computers. The first entries were mundane, daily receipts, supply orders, employee hours. But many pages had been torn out, leaving only ragged edges in the binding. One intact page, dated June 4th, 1971, was written in shaky handwriting. Margaret left today. Didn't give notice. Found her apron on the back step, still warm. She'd been asking questions about the well. I should have warned her better. The diner isn't a business, it's a mouth. We feed it so it doesn't wander. E.H. Earl Harlan, Marcy's father. I'd seen his name on the deed paperwork. Another entry from September 1975 capped the well again. Third time this year. It keeps working itself loose. Sound coming from down there is worse at night, like voices but backward, not words, just the shape of words. If you listen too long, you start to understand. Don't listen. E.H. I sat on the floor of the storage closet, the logbook open in my lap, trying to process what I was reading. A well that needed to be capped repeatedly. Sounds that weren't words but taught you language anyway. A diner that needed to be fed. I thought about the rules, about customers who appeared and vanished, about Kayla coughing up sand, desert sand, dry sand, sand that shouldn't exist inside a human body. I thought about Rule 13. Never attempt to open the well cap. If you hear singing from the well, put salt in your pockets and return inside immediately. At the back of the logbook, someone, the handwriting was different, more recent, possibly Marcy's, had added a loose sheet of paper, folded and tucked into the back cover. Rules for when the rules stop working. My hands went cold. The list was shorter, only 6 items, but each one felt heavier than all the standard rules combined. 1. If the open sign turns on by itself when the diner is closed, do not turn it off. Leave through the back exit. 2. If the jukebox plays Blue Moon and no one touched it, lock the front door and turn off the open sign. Do not answer if anyone knocks, regardless of what voice they use. 3. If you see yourself in the diner when you know you are alone, leave immediately. Do not return for 24 hours. 4. If the well cap is open, close it using only wood and iron. Do not look down. Do not listen. 5. If booth 3 has a customer who looks exactly like someone you know, do not speak to them. They are not who they appear to be. 6. If the desert comes inside, there is nothing you can do. Make peace. I read that last line 3 times. If the desert comes inside, there is nothing you can do. What did that mean? Sand on the floor? The smell of dry wind indoors? Or something worse? Something I hadn't encountered yet? I returned everything to the boxes, stacked them precisely as I'd found them, and locked the closet. My hands were shaking again, that cold tremor that came from reading things you weren't supposed to know, from confirming that the rules weren't paranoia or tradition. They were documentation, survival protocols refined over decades by people who'd watched others die. That night, I paid attention to Kayla in a new way. She moved through her shift mechanically, as I'd noted before, but now I saw other changes. She never turned her back to the windows. She flinched when the door opened, even when she'd clearly seen the customer approaching from outside. And twice I caught her standing at the back exit, door cracked open, staring out at the lot where the well sat under its warped wooden cap. "You okay?" I asked during a slow period around 2 a.m. She looked at me and her eyes were flat. Not scared, not tired, just flat, like something behind them had gone dark. "Do you hear it?" she asked quietly. "Hear what?" "The singing. My stomach dropped. Kayla, where do you hear singing? She pointed toward the back lot. From the well. Started last night. It's pretty, like a lullaby, but... She trailed off, tilting her head as if listening. But the words are backward. I almost understand them. Rule 13. If you hear singing from the well, put salt in your pockets and return inside immediately. Come here, I said, pulling her toward the kitchen. I grabbed the large salt container, filled a plastic bag, and pressed it into her hands. Keep this in your pockets. All shift. Don't ask why, just do it. Why? She asked, but she was already tucking the bag into her apron, her movements automatic. Because I don't want you ending up like the last waitress. That got her attention. What happened to the last waitress? She quit, I said, which was true. After she heard the singing. Kayla's hand went to her apron pocket, touching the salt bag like a talisman. What is this place, Ethan? I wanted to tell her everything, the clippings, the logbook, the rules for when the rules stop working. But I remembered what Marcy had said. The diner learns you. It copies you. If I told Kayla too much, if I made her understand the full scope of what we were dealing with, would that knowledge make her more dangerous to whatever intelligence ran beneath this place? Would it mark her? It's just a diner, I lied. But it has rules for a reason. Follow them and you'll be fine. She nodded, unconvinced but willing to play along. For the rest of the shift, she kept one hand in her pocket, touching the salt, and the flat look in her eyes receded slightly. At 4 a.m., during a bathroom break, I stepped outside through the back exit. The desert was utterly black, no moon, stars obscured by high clouds. The air smelled like ozone and dry stone. The well sat 30 yards away, the cap clearly visible as a darker circle against the dark ground. As I watched, wind moved across the lot. I could hear it approaching, see it disturb the scrub brush. But when it reached the well, it stopped. Just stopped. Like the well was a hole in the world where wind couldn't exist. And beneath the silence, I heard it. Singing. Faint, distant, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. Voices layered over voices, harmonizing in intervals that shouldn't work but did. Words that sounded like English played backward. Syllables that tugged at something deep in my brain, promising understanding if I just listened a little longer. Just stepped a little closer. My hand found the salt in my pocket. I'd started carrying it after reading the logbook, and the singing cut off instantly mid-syllable like someone had slammed a door. I backed into the diner, locked the exit, and didn't go outside again for the rest of my shift. When Marcy arrived at 6 a.m., she found me mopping the kitchen for the third time, scrubbing at stains that didn't exist. You heard it, she said, not a question. The well, and? I came back inside. She nodded, setting her purse on the counter. Good. My father heard it once, listened for almost 5 minutes before he remembered the salt. He said it took him 3 days before he stopped understanding things he shouldn't. Like what? Marcy looked at me, her sharp eyes sad and ancient. Like what the desert wants. What it's been waiting for. Why it tolerates us feeding it scraps when it could just take us all at once. She started the coffee maker, movements routine and grounding. He never told me the specifics, just said that some knowledge makes you digestible. Digestible. I thought about Kayla, about the sand she'd coughed up, about the flat look in her eyes when she stared at the well. Is Kayla in danger? I asked. Yes, Marcy said simply. But then so are you. So am I. Everyone who works here is in danger every shift. The question isn't whether you're at risk, it's whether you're willing to follow the rules that keep the risk manageable. She poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one to me. My father used to say the diner is a treaty. We feed it attention, ritual, compliance. In exchange, it stays in one place. It doesn't wander. It doesn't expand. She sipped her coffee, grimaced at the temperature. The rules are the terms of the treaty. Break them, and you're renegotiating terms you don't understand with something that doesn't think like you. What happens if we just left, closed it down? Someone tried that, 1959. Owners packed up, posted a closed sign, abandoned the property. She set down her cup. 3 weeks later, every resident within 30 miles reported the same dream. A diner that followed them, appearing in different locations each night, getting closer. Children saw it in their backyards. Deputies saw it on their patrols. Always the same building, always getting closer. What happened? The owners came back, reopened. The dream stopped. She met my eyes. The diner doesn't close, Ethan. It just changes who's running it. I finished my coffee in silence, watching the sun rise over the desert, turning the sand gold and pink and ordinary. In daylight, the well looked harmless. Just an old stone cylinder with a wooden cap. The kind of thing you'd see on a historical preservation site. But I knew now what it really was. A mouth. And we were feeding it so it wouldn't get hungry enough to wander. I found Marcy in her office 3 nights later, surrounded by ledgers and paperwork that looked like it dated back to the Eisenhower administration. She was smoking, a violation of every health code, but who was going to report her, and staring at a black and white photograph pinned to the corkboard above her desk. The photo showed the diner, but younger. The paint fresh, the neon sign bright and new, the parking lot full of cars with rounded fenders and chrome grills. A man stood in front, tall, weathered, squinting at the camera like he resented having his picture taken. Behind him, barely visible in the diner's window, a woman's silhouette. "My father," Marcy said without turning around. 1967, 3 months before my mother left. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether I was intruding. Left? Walked into the desert one night after her shift. Never came back. Search parties found her shoes about a mile out, still tied, arranged neatly next to each other like she'd just stepped out of them and kept walking. Marcy tapped ash into a coffee mug. I was 6. Don't remember her much. Just her voice telling me to stay away from the well. She finally turned to look at me. "You've been reading the old records." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yeah." "Good. You should know what you're dealing with." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit, we need to talk." I sat. The office was small, cluttered, filled with the smell of old paper and cigarette smoke and something underneath. The same mineral dry smell that permeated the entire building, like the desert itself had seeped into the walls. "How much did you figure out?" Marcy asked. "Enough to know this place isn't normal. Enough to know the rules aren't just paranoia. Enough to know people have disappeared and it's connected to the well." I paused. "Not enough to understand why you stay." Marcy smiled, a thin, bitter expression. "Because someone has to. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. Someone has to maintain the treaty or—" She trailed off, looking back at the photograph. "Let me tell you a story. The real history of this place." She lit another cigarette from the ember of the first. "The Coyote Diner has existed in some form since 1933, not this building. The building's been rebuilt twice, burned down once, but always in the same location. Always this exact spot on the highway. My grandfather opened the first version, a trading post and rest stop for people crossing the desert during the Depression. He didn't choose the location because it was strategic. He chose it because it was already here." "What do you mean, already here?" "The well," Marcy said simply. "The well predates the diner by at least a century, maybe more. Local Paiute stories mention it. They called it something that translates roughly to the mouth that listens. They avoided this area, considered it spiritually contaminated." My grandfather thought that was superstition. Thought he'd found cheap land in a good location. She blew smoke toward the ceiling. He learned otherwise. Within 6 months, people started disappearing. Customers would come in, order food, walk outside to use the outhouse, and never return. Truckers would park overnight and be found catatonic in the morning, staring at nothing, unable to speak. My grandfather tried to close down, relocate, but she gestured vaguely. You already know what happens when you try to close it. The dreams. The diner following people, appearing in impossible places. My grandfather realized he couldn't abandon it, so he did the next best thing. He tried to understand it. Spent years documenting patterns. Which customers vanished? When? Under what circumstances? He started noticing consistencies. Rules. I leaned forward. He created the rules? No, he discovered them. Marcy tapped Ash again. The rules were already there, embedded in how the place operates. He just codified them, made them explicit, started passing them down to employees, refining them each generation. My father added to them. I've added a few. Each time someone breaks a rule and survives, we learn something new. And the people who don't survive? Marcy's expression hardened. They become part of the diner's ecosystem. That's the best word I have for it. The diner isn't just a building, it's a threshold. A thin place where something else presses against our reality. The well is the anchor point, the deepest part of the threshold. And that's something else? It's always hungry. Not for food, for attention, for ritual, for... She struggled with the words. For acknowledgement. It wants to be recognized, served, respected. The rules are how we do that without being consumed. We give it structure, routine, small offerings of compliance. In exchange, it stays contained. Mostly. Mostly, I repeated. There are breaches, you've seen them. The man in booth 3, the woman in white. They're not human, they're masks it wears, testing us, seeing if we'll break protocol. Every time we follow the rules, we reinforce the boundary. Every time we break them, She gestured at me. You saw what happened to Kayla. I thought about the sand, about the flat look in Kayla's eyes. Is she going to be okay? Marcy was quiet for a long moment. Probably not. She's been marked. Once it gets that deep inside you, literally inside you, it's hard to come all the way back. Best case, she quits and leaves the area, puts distance between herself and this place. Worst case. She didn't finish. Worst case, she ends up like your mother. Marcy flinched but didn't deny it. My mother started hearing the singing 6 months before she disappeared. My father tried everything. Salt, iron, prayers, even brought in a Paiute elder who performed a cleansing. Nothing worked. Once the well gets your attention, it doesn't let go easily. She stubbed out her cigarette. The singing is an invitation. It wants you to understand the language it speaks. Wants you to comprehend what it is, what it needs, what it offers. But human minds aren't built for that kind of understanding. The knowledge doesn't fit right. It warps you, changes the shape of your thoughts until you're not yourself anymore. You become something that can exist on both sides of the threshold. And then you walk into the desert. Marcy confirmed. Because you understand finally that you belong out there more than you belong in here. I sat back, processing. The office felt smaller, the walls closer. Outside, I could hear the diner's normal sounds, the hiss of the coffee maker, the rattle of the kitchen vent, the buzz of neon. Ordinary sounds masking something vast and terrible. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because something's changing. Marcy pulled out a different photograph from her desk drawer, recent, printed on regular paper. It showed the menu board, the one above the counter. In the photo, written in chalk, was the line I'd been erasing every shift. Sunrise. Ask for Ethan. I didn't take this picture, Marcy said. It arrived in the mail 2 days ago. No return address. Postmarked from Goldfield, but the Goldfield post office has been closed for 15 years. My skin went cold. The diner is learning you, Ethan. It knows your name. It's putting you on the menu. That's not normal. In all my years, I've never seen it single out an employee like this. She met my eyes. My working theory is that you have a choice to make. The diner is offering you something, power, knowledge, belonging, I don't know. But it wants something from you in return. What could I possibly have that it wants? Consent, Marcy said quietly. It can take people who break rules, who stumble into its influence accidentally. But someone who serves it willingly, who understands what it is and chooses to feed it anyway, that's different. That's a priest, not a victim. That's someone who can expand its reach. I stood up, needing to move, to pace. I'm not serving that thing. I'm just trying to survive long enough to save money and leave. I know, but it's patient. It's been here longer than this country has existed. It can wait for you to get desperate enough, tired enough, curious enough. She pulled out the second envelope, the one she'd mentioned my first night. Rules for when the rules stop working. You should keep this, just in case. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Has it ever gotten that bad? Where the normal rules stopped working? Twice. Once in 1974, when a group of college kids tried to perform a seance in the diner as a prank. The building sealed itself. Doors wouldn't open, windows wouldn't break. My father was trapped inside with them for 6 hours. When the doors finally opened, 3 of the kids were gone, just vanished. The other 2 were... She paused. Changed. They spoke in unison, knew things they couldn't know, had to be institutionalized. And the second time? Last year. Previous cook, guy named David. He decided the rules were negotiable, started making small violations, testing boundaries, trying to interact with the customers who weren't human. Thought he could befriend them, learn from them. Marcy's voice went flat. One night, the jukebox played Blue Moon on its own. David ignored the rule. Didn't lock the door, didn't turn off the open sign. Something knocked, he answered. What happened? We found him 3 days later, still at his station in the kitchen cooking. Except he'd been cooking the same omelet over and over hundreds of times, never eating it, never serving it, just cooking and scraping it into the trash and starting over. He didn't respond to his name. Didn't seem to know we were there. Paramedics said he was catatonic. Last I heard, he was in a facility in Carson City, still doesn't speak. She stood up, joints cracking. That's why we have the backup rules. For when the normal containment fails, for when the diner stops playing by its own patterns and starts actively hunting. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. What if I just leave? Right now. Pack my stuff and go. You can leave any time, I won't stop you, but Ethan... She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. It knows your name now. It's tasted your attention. Whether you're here or in Reno or Los Angeles or New York, a part of you will always be listening for the jukebox, always checking reflections to make sure you're alone. Always wondering if the next customer who asks for something off menu is really human. She left me alone in the office, surrounded by decades of documentation, decades of small tragedies and narrow escapes, decades of people trying to maintain a treaty with something that didn't think like them and didn't care if they survived. I opened the envelope and read the backup rules again, paying special attention to the last one. If the desert comes inside, there is nothing you can do. Make peace. I wondered what that would look like. The desert coming inside, sand pouring through the walls, the smell of dry wind filling the kitchen. Or something more abstract, the vast, patient hunger of the emptiness itself, finally claiming what it had always been owed. My shift started in an hour. I folded the backup rules into my pocket next to the salt and walked back to the kitchen to prep. Through the window, the sun was setting, turning the desert red as old blood. The neon coyote began to buzz. And somewhere out in the darkness, the well waited, singing its backward lullaby to anyone willing to listen. It happened on a Saturday night, or technically very early Sunday morning, during the deadest stretch of the week. No truckers, no drunks, just Kayla and me and the empty highway stretching into darkness on both sides. Kayla had been getting worse, more distant. She'd stopped making eye contact with customers, just took orders mechanically and delivered food without speaking. During breaks, I'd find her standing at the back door again, staring at the well, lips moving like she was singing along to something I couldn't hear. I'd tried talking to her, suggesting she take time off, see a doctor, anything. She just looked at me with those flat eyes and said, "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. She was being digested slowly, and I didn't know how to stop it. At 1:47 a.m., the diner was empty. I was prepping hash browns for the breakfast rush that might or might not materialize. Kayla was wiping down tables that were already clean, moving in slow circles, humming something tuneless. That's when I saw him. The boy appeared outside the front window, his small face pressed against the glass. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, wearing a striped shirt that was too thin for the desert night, barefoot, face smudged with dirt. His breath fogged the window, short, panicked huffs, and his eyes were wide with terror. Every instinct I had screamed at me to help him. A child, alone in the desert at 2 a.m., clearly lost or hurt or running from something. I was moving toward the door before I consciously decided to. "Don't!" Kayla's voice stopped me. She was standing behind the counter, perfectly still, looking at the boy with an expression I couldn't read. "Don't open the door. Kayla, he's a kid. Read the rules." I pulled out the laminated sheet, hands shaking, and found Rule 18. If you see a child outside the windows after midnight, do not open the door. Offer water through the mail slot only if they ask specifically for regular water. The boy knocked on the glass. Soft, polite, tap, tap, tap. His mouth moved, forming a single word. "Please." My hand was already on the door handle. I could see his tears, see him shivering, see the absolute terror in his face. What kind of monster would leave a child outside in the dark? "Ethan, don't!" Kayla's voice was sharper now. "Look at his feet." I looked down. The boy's bare feet stood on gravel, the sharp kind that would cut skin, tear soles. But there was no blood, no flinching, no reaction at all to standing on what should have been agonizing terrain. And his shadow cast by the diner's exterior lights fell in the wrong direction, not away from the light source, but toward it, as if he were a hole in the world rather than a solid object. The boy knocked again, harder. His face changed, still terrified, still childlike, but something in the proportions was wrong. Eyes slightly too large. Mouth slightly too wide. "Please," he mouthed again, and this time I heard it through the glass, though his voice was too loud, too clear, like someone speaking directly into my ear. "Please, I'm cold. Let me in." I should have stepped back. Should have followed the rule, should have remembered every warning, every story, every documentation of what happens when you break protocol. But he looked so scared. I cracked the door open, just a few inches, just enough to speak to him, to assess the situation, to use my judgment like a rational adult. Cold air flooded in, not normal cold, not desert night cold, but the cold of deep caves and frozen lakes and places where heat has never existed. It carried the smell of wet stone and copper and something organic rotting. The boy's face lifted. His terror vanished, replaced by something else. His smile stretched wider than his face should allow. jaw unhinging slightly like a snake preparing to swallow something too large. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, and his voice was layered. A child's voice overlaid with something older, something that had learned to mimic human speech but had never been human itself. I slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt, stumbling backward. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, in my fingertips. The boy stood outside the glass, still smiling that impossible smile. He raised one hand and knocked once, a single deliberate sound that seemed to echo through the entire building, making the windows vibrate, making the dishes rattle on their shelves. The diner alarm chirped once, a sound I'd never heard before. High, electronic, wrong. Kayla grabbed my arm. "1 minute, don't move. Don't speak. Don't look away from him." "What? 1 minute," she repeated, her voice urgent. "When they acknowledge you by name, you have to stay still for exactly 1 minute. It's not in the printed rules, but Marcy told me, don't move." I stood frozen, watching the boy through the glass. He didn't move either. Just stood there, smiling, his eyes reflecting the diner lights like an animal's, his shadow still falling the wrong direction. 60 seconds has never felt so long. I counted them in my head, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to think about what would happen if I moved too soon, if I broke eye contact, if I failed this test I hadn't known I was taking. At 60 seconds, the boy's smile faded, his jaw realigned with a soft click I shouldn't have been able to hear through the glass. He turned and walked into the darkness, moving with a strange gait, not quite a child's walk, not quite anything human. He didn't diminish with distance, didn't fade, just walked at the same size and clarity until the darkness swallowed him completely. Like he'd stepped through a curtain rather than across a parking lot. I collapsed into the nearest booth, shaking. Kayla brought me water that I couldn't drink because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. "How did you know?" I managed to ask. "About the 1 minute?" Marcy told me, after the sunrise incident. Said if anything ever acknowledges us by name, we freeze for exactly 60 seconds. It's a formality, like it's required to give us a chance to refuse. "Refuse what?" Kayla sat across from me, and for the first time in days, her eyes looked clear, afraid but clear. "Whatever it's offering, rescue, comfort, answers, belonging. All lies, but we have to be offered the choice. The minute is when we make it." I thought about the boy's smile, about his voice saying my name. What happens if you move, if you accept? I don't know. No one who accepted has been around to explain. We sat in silence, listening to the diner settle around us. The refrigerator hummed, the neon buzzed, normal sounds, safe sounds. At 2:13 a.m., my phone alarm went off, the one I'd set for the kitchen blackout rule. I stood on shaking legs and walked to the kitchen, flipping off all 4 switches in sequence. Darkness swallowed everything. In that darkness, I heard sounds that shouldn't have been possible. Plates sliding across counters, though I'd put them all away. Footsteps in the dining area, though Kayla and I were both in the kitchen. And worst of all, a child's laughter, high, delighted, echoing from somewhere that sounded simultaneously very close and impossibly distant. Then from the kitchen vent, a whisper. "Cook for us, Ethan. Make the sun rise. We're so hungry." My hand hovered over the light switch. The rule said 1 minute exactly. I'd counted to 43. 17 seconds remaining. 17 seconds of darkness while something moved through the diner, while voices whispered from ventilation systems, while the boundary between inside and outside became negotiable. 15 seconds. The laughter again, closer now. The sound of the kitchen door swinging open. I heard the hinges creak, felt the change in air pressure. 10 seconds. Breathing behind me, not human breathing, too measured, too deliberate. The breathing of something imitating the sound without understanding its rhythm. 5 seconds. A hand touched my shoulder, small, cold, impossibly cold. 1. I flipped the switches. Light flooded back. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it. Empty, clean, no footprints, no disturbances. Kayla stood in the doorway, face pale, looking at something behind me. I turned slowly. On the prep counter, written in what looked like condensation or morning dew, impossible in a kitchen this dry, was a message. Next time below it, a small handprint. A child's handprint, still wet. I grabbed a towel and scrubbed it away, the water ice cold against my hands, evaporating almost instantly as if it had never existed. When I turned back, Kayla was staring at the menu board above the counter, the one I'd erased 6 hours ago. New writing had appeared, chalky and faint. Sunrise, ask for Ethan. But now there was an addition, available soon. We need to tell Marcy, I said. Kayla nodded, but she was still staring at the board, lips moving silently. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that she was reading the words backward, the way you'd read the singing from the well. Kayla. She blinked, looked at me. Sorry, what? Did you just read that backward? No, She frowned. I don't know. Maybe. It makes more sense that way. That's when I knew we were running out of time. The diner wasn't just testing us anymore, it was preparing us, learning us, getting ready for something. I called Marcy from the office phone. Landline, no cell service, a beige relic from the 1980s that somehow still worked. She answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the hour. What happened? I told her everything. The boy at the window, the open door, the minute of stillness, the whispers during the blackout, the handprint. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. You opened the door, she said finally. Not a question, an accusation. Just a crack. I closed it immediately. Ethan, you opened the door, you made contact, you acknowledged it by responding. Her voice was tight, controlled fury mixing with something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. That's an invitation. You've changed your status from employee to participant. What does that mean? It means the rules might not protect you anymore. You're not just maintaining the treaty, you're engaging with what's on the other side. It knows you're willing to negotiate. She exhaled sharply. Stay put. I'm coming in. Don't serve anyone until I get there. If a customer comes in, tell them we're closed for cleaning. The open sign is on. I don't care. Close anyway. This is bigger than customer service. She hung up. I returned to the dining area where Kayla was still staring at the menu board. Marcy's coming in, I told her. We're closing early. Kayla nodded absently. Can you hear it? She asked. Hear what? The singing. It's louder tonight, like it's celebrating something. I listened. For a moment I heard nothing but the usual diner sounds. Then underneath them, barely audible, voices in harmony, words in a language I didn't know but somehow understood the shape of promising things I didn't want but desperately needed. I grabbed Kayla's shoulders. We're both going to put more salt in our pockets right now. And we're going to stand behind the counter and wait for Marcy, and we're not going to listen to anything. Understand? She looked at me, and her eyes were clear again, focused. I'm scared, Ethan. Me too. We loaded our pockets with salt, stood behind the counter and waited. Outside, the desert stretched vast and dark and patient, and from the well the singing grew louder. Marcy arrived 40 minutes later, her truck skidding into the parking lot with a spray of gravel. She came through the front door carrying a canvas bag that clinked with glass and metal, her face set in an expression I'd never seen before. Grim determination mixed with something that looked like preparation for battle. Both of you kitchen, now. We followed her through the swinging door. She set the bag on the prep counter and started pulling out items. 3 large containers of salt, a bundle of iron nails tied with red thread, a mason jar filled with what looked like dirty water, and a small leather pouch that smelled like tobacco and sage. "Ethan opened the door," she said, not looking at us. "That changed things. The diner's been testing you both for weeks, but now it knows you're willing to engage. That's a problem." "I didn't mean to," I started. "Doesn't matter what you meant. Intention is irrelevant to something that doesn't think in terms of choice and consequence the way we do." She opened the salt containers. "It thinks in terms of invitation and acceptance. You invited it to acknowledge you. It accepted. Now we have to deal with the results." Kayla spoke up, her voice small. "What are the results?" Marcy finally looked at us, and I saw exhaustion in her eyes. Decades of it worn into her bones. "The diner is going to open wrong. Probably tonight, possibly tomorrow. When it does, the normal rules become suggestions, not protections. We'll need the backup protocols." She handed each of us a copy of the secondary rules, the ones for when everything falls apart. "Read them. Memorize them. When the diner opens wrong, you'll know. The open sign will turn on by itself, the front door will unlock, and customers will start arriving who don't follow normal patterns. They won't be testing anymore. They'll be claiming." "Claiming what?" I asked. "You, Kayla, me, anyone inside when it happens. The diner will try to take us across the threshold, make us permanent residents of whatever space it occupies." She started arranging salt in lines across the floor, geometric patterns that looked half like protection circles and half like circuit diagrams. "Our job is to starve it. No food served, no engagement with customers, no compliance with requests. We make the diner useless as a feeding ground, force it to close itself." "And if that doesn't work?" She didn't answer, just kept pouring salt. It happened 3 hours later. I was monitoring the grill. Kayla was restocking napkins. Marcy was in the office finalizing some paperwork. Normal tasks, routine work. At 3:47 a.m., the open sign outside turned on with a loud electric pop that made us all freeze. Marcy had turned it off when she arrived. I watched through the window as the neon blazed to life, brighter than I'd ever seen it. The coyotes howl, casting blue and red light across the parking lot. As I watched, the front door's deadbolt slid open with a heavy click. "It's starting," Marcy said, emerging from the office. "Positions. Remember, no food, no engagement, no compliance." The first customer arrived within minutes. He was tall, wearing a business suit that would have looked normal in 1955 but seemed costume-like now. He walked to the counter and sat on the center stool, directly across from where I stood in the kitchen pass-through. When he smiled, his teeth were perfectly white and slightly too numerous. I counted them unconsciously. 34 teeth where there should have been 32. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I'd like to order." "We're closed for cleaning," Kayla said, her voice shaking but audible. "The sign says you're open." He gestured outside where the neon blazed. "I've been driving for such a long time, I'd really appreciate some service." "I'm sorry, we can't—" "The sunrise," he interrupted gently. "I'd like Ethan to make me the sunrise. I've heard it's spectacular." More customers were arriving. A woman in a white dress, not the same one from before, but similar, the same impossible cleanliness. An old man in coveralls that smelled like motor oil and dust. A family, mother, father, 2 children, all wearing matching vacant smiles. They filled the booths, the counter stools, standing in spaces where there wasn't room. None of them cast proper shadows. All of them were watching me. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not serving food tonight." The man in the suit tilted his head, the gesture too far, neck bending at an angle that would have broken human vertebrae. "That's disappointing. We've been waiting so patiently. We've followed all the proper protocols. We've given you time to learn. Now we'd like our meal." Marcy stepped forward, positioning herself between the customers and us. "This establishment is closed. You need to leave." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds stopped. No refrigerator hum, no neon buzz, no wind outside. The diner held its breath. Then in perfect unison, every customer spoke. "We're hungry, Marcy. Your father fed us. Your grandfather fed us. It's your turn." The jukebox in the corner clicked on by itself. After a moment of mechanical whirring, music began to play. A song I recognized from oldies stations, slow and romantic and completely wrong in this context. "Blue Moon." Marcy's face went pale. "Shit. Everyone to the kitchen, now." We retreated through the swinging door. Marcy slammed it shut, though we all knew it wouldn't hold if they decided to follow. She grabbed the iron nails from her bag and began hammering them into the doorframe. 3 on each side, precise placement, working with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced this. "What happens now?" Kayla asked. "Now we wait. The song is a claiming ritual. While it plays, the diner is fully theirs. We can't go out there, we can't interact, we just..." She finished the last nail. "We survive until it ends." Through the pass-through, I could see the customers sitting motionless, all facing the kitchen, all wearing those vacant smiles. The family's children, both boys, both around 7 or 8, waved at me in perfect synchronization. The temperature started dropping, my breath fogged. Frost formed on the stainless steel surfaces, spreading in fractal patterns that looked almost like writing. "Marcy?" Kayla's voice was very small. "Why is there sand on the floor?" I looked down. Black sand was seeping under the kitchen door, not pouring but flowing upward, defying gravity, spreading across the tiles in thin streams like living things searching for something. "The desert," Marcy whispered. "It's coming inside. The backup rules. Rule 6. If the desert comes inside, there is nothing you can do. Make peace." "No," I said. "No, there has to be something." "There isn't." Marcy sat down heavily on a prep stool, suddenly looking every one of her years. "This is what happens when the treaty breaks completely. When the diner decides it's done negotiating. The desert reclaims what was always its territory." The sand was ankle-deep now, rising steadily, cold and dry and smelling like drought and extinction. In it I could see things moving. Not insects, not anything biological, but shapes that suggested movement, patterns that implied purpose. Kayla was crying silently, salt water cutting tracks through the dust on her face. I thought about the logbook entry. We feed it so it doesn't wander. "Wait," I said, "what if we starve it? You said that's what we do, make the diner useless as a feeding ground." "We tried. They're still here." "No, we refuse to serve them, but the diner is still operational. The equipment is on. The lights are working, we're still maintaining it." I looked around the kitchen, at the grill, the fryer, the prep stations. What if we shut it all down? Completely. Kill the power, dump the food, destroy the feeding ground entirely. Marcy stared at me. "That would violate a dozen rules." "The rules aren't working anymore. You said it yourself. When the diner opens wrong, the rules become suggestions. So we try something else." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then slowly, she nodded. "It might not work, might make things worse, but we're out of good options." We moved quickly. I turned off every piece of equipment: grill, fryer, ovens, refrigerators, coffee makers. Kayla emptied the dry storage, dumping flour, sugar, rice onto the sand-covered floor. Marcy opened the walk-in cooler and started throwing out everything. Eggs cracking, milk spilling, meat thudding onto the tiles. The customers in the dining area stood in unison. No sound, just movement. 30 people rising as one, turning to face the kitchen with those perfect empty smiles. I found the main breaker panel in the utility closet and started flipping switches. The overhead lights died. The neon sign outside went dark. The refrigerator motors ground to a halt. In the sudden darkness, the singing from the well became audible. Loud now, no longer distant, a chorus of voices so layered and dense it sounded like a language I'd never heard and always known. "The pilot lights," Marcy said. "Turn off the gas." I crawled under the equipment, finding the shut-off valves, turning them until the faint hiss of gas stopped. The desert smell grew stronger, mineral and dust and something underneath like heated stone. When I emerged, the dining area was empty. Not abandoned. The customers hadn't walked out. They were just gone, as if they'd never existed. The booth sat vacant. The stools were empty. Only the jukebox remained active, powered by nothing, still playing Blue Moon on eternal repeat. The sand had stopped rising. It sat frozen at knee height, no longer spreading, no longer moving. Marcy was leaning against the prep counter, breathing hard. Did it work? I looked around. The kitchen was destroyed, food everywhere, equipment dead, nothing functional. We'd turned the diner into exactly what we'd intended, useless. A building that couldn't feed anyone, couldn't serve anyone, couldn't fulfill its purpose. The jukebox clicked off mid-song. In the silence that followed, I heard something crack, a sound like ice breaking or old wood splintering. It came from outside, from the direction of the well. "We should check," I said. "We should absolutely not check," Marcy countered. But she was already moving toward the back door, pulling it open. The well cap, warped wood that had covered the opening for decades, had split down the middle. The two halves lay on the ground beside the stone cylinder, cleanly broken as if cut by an expert hand. The well itself was dark, empty, silent. For the first time since I'd arrived, I heard no singing from its depths. "We starved it," Marcy said quietly. "The well, the diner, whatever intelligence runs through both, we denied it sustenance. It couldn't feed, so it—" She gestured at the broken cap. "Withdrew." "Is it over?" Kayla asked from behind us. None of us answered because none of us knew. We stood in the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by a destroyed kitchen and a diner that had forgotten how to be threatening, watching a well that had finally stopped singing. Above us, the sky was beginning to lighten, not with dawn yet, but with the promise of it, that first faint gray that says the darkness is negotiable, temporary, defeatable. The desert stretched around us, vast and patient as always. But for now, for this moment, it was quiet. Dawn came slowly, turning the desert from black to gray to gold in gradual stages that felt earned rather than given. The three of us sat on the back step of the diner, exhausted, covered in flour and salt and sand, watching the sun climb over the distant mountains. No one spoke. What was there to say? At 6:30 a.m., Marcy stood with a groan, joints popping. "I need to survey the damage, figure out how much this is going to cost to repair." She disappeared inside. Kayla and I remained on the step, listening to the morning birds, the first bird sounds I'd heard since arriving, as if even the wildlife had been avoiding this place until now. "Are you going to stay?" Kayla asked quietly. I'd been asking myself the same question. "I don't know." "Are you?" "No." She said it with certainty. "I can't. Even if it's safe now, and I'm not convinced it is, I can't unhear the singing. Can't unlearn what I learned." She looked at me, her eyes clear but sad. "You should leave too." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere. Anywhere but here." Before I could respond, Marcy called from inside, her voice strange. "Ethan. Kayla, you need to see this." We found her standing at the counter, staring at the register. On the counter beside it lay a receipt, thermal paper faded slightly at the edges, printed in the register's characteristic dot matrix font. The timestamp said 6:07 a.m., less than 30 minutes ago. But none of us had been near the register. None of us had printed anything. The receipt read, the Coyote Diner receipt, 447832. 6:07 a.m. for sunrise. Paid in full subtotal, 0 tip. You'll learn total, 0 thank you for your service. Below that, in the space where customer signatures sometimes appeared, was a single mark. Not a signature, just a symbol. It looked like a simplified drawing of a coyote's head, mouth open in a howl. Marcy picked up the receipt with shaking hands. It's claiming the sunrise was served. But we didn't serve anything, I protested. We destroyed the kitchen. We shut everything down. Maybe that was the sunrise. Kayla's voice was distant, thoughtful. The end of something, the destruction of the feeding ground. Maybe that's what it wanted all along. I thought about the woman in white asking for the sunrise. About my name appearing on the menu board. About the child at the window and the voices in the darkness and the singing from the well. All of it had been pushing me toward this moment. Toward the decision to starve the diner, to destroy its ability to function. I'd thought I was refusing to serve them. What if I'd been serving them exactly what they wanted? The tip, Marcy said quietly, still staring at the receipt. You'll learn. Learn what? We didn't have an answer. I packed my bag that afternoon. My room behind the kitchen felt smaller than ever. The cracked mirror reflecting someone who looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. I'd saved some money, not as much as I'd hoped, but enough to get me to Reno. Maybe find a new job, start over. Marcy paid me in cash for my final week, plus a bonus she called hazard pay. She didn't try to convince me to stay. If you ever need a reference, don't list me, she said. You were never here. This place doesn't exist on paper for most people. Better it stays that way. Kayla had already left that morning, catching a ride with a trucker headed to Vegas. She'd hugged me before leaving, held on maybe a second too long and whispered, "Don't come back. Even if you're curious. Even if you think you left something behind, don't come back." I promised I wouldn't. My car started on the third try, better than usual. I loaded my duffel in the passenger seat and stood for a moment, looking at the diner in daylight. It looked so ordinary. Tired paint, dusty windows, a building that had outlived its purpose but stubbornly refused to collapse. The well cap was still broken, the two halves lying beside the stone circle like discarded shells. In daylight, it looked harmless. Just an old well, dry and abandoned, the kind of thing you'd see on historical markers. I got in my car and started driving. For the first 5 miles, everything was normal. Highway, desert, distance. Then I noticed my salt, the bag I'd been carrying in my pocket, was gone. I'd had it when I packed, I was certain. But now my pocket was empty, no residue, no trace of salt at all. I told myself I'd dropped it, lost it during the chaos. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things during that drive back to Reno. The new job came surprisingly easily. A kitchen position at a corporate hotel, nothing special, but it paid regularly and the building didn't have a history of consuming its employees. I found a cheap apartment, started rebuilding my savings, tried to settle back into normal life. For 3 weeks, everything was fine. Then on a Tuesday evening during the dinner rush, a customer approached my station. Middle-aged man, business casual, unremarkable in every way except that his shoes were completely clean despite the rain outside. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I know this is unusual, but I have a specific dietary requirement. Could you make me something off-menu?" The kitchen noise faded. My hands stopped moving. Every muscle in my body went cold. "We have a menu," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "I can make you anything on it." "I understand, but what I need isn't listed. I'm happy to pay extra." He smiled. Normal teeth, normal number, nothing wrong. "I just need something special, something sunrise-themed, perhaps." Behind me, I heard a sound I knew was impossible. The buzz of neon, the specific frequency of a coyote howl rendered in electrical light. I turned slowly. The hotel kitchen had no neon signs. But in the reflection of the stainless steel equipment, I saw it clearly. Blue and red light flickering in that familiar pattern. When I looked back directly, there was nothing. Just normal kitchen equipment in normal fluorescent lighting. The customer was still smiling, waiting patiently. "I can't help you," I said quietly. "Are you sure? I've come such a long way. We've invested so much in your education." He tilted his head, not too far, not unnaturally, just slightly. "You learned so much at your previous position. It would be a shame to waste that knowledge." I wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to quit immediately and drive in any direction until I reached an ocean or a border or some threshold the diner couldn't cross. But I remembered the receipt. You'll learn. This was what I was supposed to learn. That destroying the feeding ground hadn't ended anything. It had just changed my role. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a carrier. Someone who'd been marked, taught, prepared. Somewhere in Nevada, the diner sat empty and dark, its kitchen destroyed, its well silent and open. But it didn't need to be there anymore. It had found a way to expand. "No," I said firmly. "I can't make you anything off menu. Our policy is strict, but I can offer you toast and salt if you'd like." The man's smile faded slightly. Toast and salt. How traditional. He seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Very well. Perhaps next time you'll be ready." He walked away, disappearing into the dining room. When I checked with the front of house staff later, they had no record of seating anyone matching his description. That night I found salt in my apartment, bags of it I hadn't purchased, placed in corners on windowsills beside my bed. Protection I didn't remember creating but desperately needed. I carry salt everywhere now. Keep it in my pockets, my car, my locker at work. I've memorized the rules, all of them, including the ones for when the rules stop working. I check my reflection to make sure I'm alone. I listen for the jukebox, even in buildings that don't have one. And sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I hear it, faint and distant and beautiful. The singing from a well 200 miles away. Teaching me words in a language I don't speak but increasingly understand. The desert is patient. The diner taught me that, if nothing else. It can wait for me to get tired enough, desperate enough, curious enough to finally cook what it wants. The sunrise was never a meal. It was an awakening. And I'm terrified that one day I'll be hungry enough to serve it. Last week, a new diner opened on Highway 95, about 30 miles south of where the Coyote used to be. According to locals, it appeared overnight, just a building that wasn't there on Tuesday and was open for business on Wednesday. The neon sign shows a coyote mid-howl. The open light stays on 24 hours. And late at night, if you listen carefully, you can hear a jukebox playing. They're hiring.